She had stopped a soldier's bleeding under fire with her bare hands, carried a burned Marine out of a vehicle on her own back, and flown 9 time zones home to find the deadbolt on her front door changed to a brand she had never bought. Danielle Whitfield stood on the porch of 4417 Delary Street in the desert-tan boots she had worn off the transport 4 hours earlier. Her key still fit the knob. It still turned. It was the new deadbolt above it that didn't move. Through the front window she could see her own living room rearranged around her absence. A couch facing the wrong wall, 4 small pairs of shoes lined up by the door in a size that was not Malik's and not Nia's, and taped to the door of her refrigerator, a child's drawing of a house with a yellow sun over it. She had not drawn it. Her children had not drawn it. She had come home from a war to a house that was full and none of the people inside it were hers. 2 blocks north on Claiborne, a black car slowed at a fenced lot where a foundation had just been poured. The man in the back seat was Curtis Boyd. 57 years old, worth a little over $3 billion, founder of a freight company that moved other people's belongings across all 50 states in trucks that carried his name. A man who kept a manifest for every box so that nothing he was responsible for could ever be lost. He was not looking at the lot. He was looking at a woman sitting down on a curb across the street, in boots the color of sand, holding a triangle of folded flag against her chest the way you hold something you have promised not to drop. He told the driver to stop. He did not say why. He could not have said why, not out loud, not yet, only that his hands had gone cold and that he was 8 years old again and that no one, not once, in 49 years had ever come back for him. She had done the one thing the country trains you to do. She had gone where they sent her, and she had come back for her children. And a system with more money than any man, more offices than any city, more forms than any war, had failed to do the one thing an ordinary neighbor could have done. It had failed to keep 2 children on the block their mother left them on. She came home to an empty house and 2 kids handed to strangers, and no one would tell her why. Curtis Boyd had spent a lifetime learning not to look at things like this. He looked. 9 months before the deadbolt there had been a porch. It was Miss Ruthie's porch on the same block, 3 doors down, and it had a screen door that never latched right and a kitchen behind it that fed half of Delary Street whether they asked or not. Ruthie Whitfield cooked the way some women pray, constantly and without announcement, and she raised her granddaughter Danielle on 2 things: red beans on Monday and a single sentence she repeated. So often it stopped sounding like advice and started sounding like weather. You don't leave your people to prove you love them. You come back. Coming back is the whole promise. Danny had heard it 1,000 times before she understood it once. She understood it the year Ruthie died. The house passed to her then, 4417, the shotgun double with the porch, and she moved her own 2 children into the front rooms where she had learned to peel garlic, standing on a chair. Same porch, same screen door, same sentence now in her own mouth. Malik was 6 then and Nia was a baby. Danny was a nurse's aide at the time, and then she was more than that, because the Army Reserve took the aide and made her a combat medic, a 68W, and taught her how to stop a man from bleeding out in the back of a vehicle moving at speed. She was good at it. She was good at it the way Ruthie was good at feeding people. It was the same skill, really. You go toward the person who is failing and you keep them. When the deployment orders came in March, they came the way orders come. No negotiation. 9 months, a forward aid station outside Kuwait City, report date fixed. Danny did what a single mother with a report date does. She built the plan the Army requires her to build, the family care plan, the document that says who keeps the children while the soldier is gone. She named her cousin Renice as caretaker. She filled out the forms. She set up the allotment, $780 a month, peeled off her pay, and routed to Renice for the kids. And the rest, most of the rest, she left to cover the rent on 4417. $1,150 a month. She had paid it on time for 4 years. 58 consecutive months. Never once late. She kissed Malik, who was 9 now and did not want to be kissed at the bus stop, and she kissed Nia, who was 6 and cried, and she got on the plane. The narrator will tell you what the plane felt like, but the plane is not the point. The point is what she came home to. Because a family care plan is only as good as the person who signed on to carry it. And somewhere in the 4th month, Renice stopped carrying it. The reasons were Renice's own. This story will get to them. They were not as simple as walking away, a second job, a boyfriend 3 parishes over, a landlord of her own with his own new deadbolt, a slow drowning that had nothing to do with Danny and swallowed Danny's children anyway. Renice had not made a decision so much as she had stopped being able to make them. First she was late with things. Then she was absent from things. Then, 1 week in the 4th month, she packed what was hers and left the children with a neighbor and did not come back either, and the neighbor kept them as long as a neighbor can, which is not long. And then the neighbor did the only thing she could think to do. She called someone. That was the call that started the file. The effect was simple even if the reasons were not. The children were with a cousin who could no longer keep them, in a house whose rent had quietly stopped being paid the way Danny had set it up to be paid, and a system built to notice exactly one kind of trouble. A child without a stable adult noticed. It noticed the way a smoke alarm notices. Loudly. Bluntly. Without asking where the fire came from. And the country that had sent Danny 9 time zones east to keep other people's soldiers alive did not have a single office whose job it was to hold her own 2 children in place until she got back. It had an office for placing them. It did not have an office for keeping them where they were. That is the whole story in a way. The country asks some people to leave everything to serve it, and then treats their coming back as the thing they have to explain. She learned all of this in pieces in the 41 days that followed the deadbolt, standing in fluorescent rooms. The first room was on Claiborne, a beige office with a number ticket dispenser and a laminated sign that said all visits by appointment. Danny did not have an appointment. She had a duffel bag, a Class A uniform folded inside it that she had not had a reason to put on, and a question she asked the woman at the desk in the flattest voice she owned. "Where are my children?" The woman asked for a case number. Danny did not have a case number. The woman asked for the name of the assigned worker. Danny did not have that either. What Danny had was a home of record, a deployment order, and the specific cellular certainty that she had left 2 children on this block and come back to find the block rearranged around their absence. None of that fit in the fields on the woman's screen. There was a form. There is always a form. A man 2 chairs down told her his own version while she waited. He had been trying to get his grandson back for 9 weeks, and he said the trick was to stay calm. They hold it against you if you don't stay calm, and he said it the way people say things they have decided to believe because the alternative is unbearable. Danny nodded. She stayed calm. She had stayed calm inside a vehicle taking fire. She could stay calm in a beige room with a ticket dispenser. Somewhere behind the counter a phone rang 4 times and stopped. A child in a stroller dropped a bottle and no one picked it up. Danny filled the form out at a plastic chair bolted to the wall. And while she filled it out, she did the thing she always did, the thing the aid station had drilled into her until it was reflex. She inventoried. Tridge is inventory. You catalog what is in front of you and you deduce what is missing. What was in front of her, on the desk of the beige office, a bowl of individually wrapped peppermints, a photograph of the desk woman's own kids at a lake, a stress ball shaped like the earth, a sign-up sheet for a potluck. What was missing? Any indication that a returning soldier's children were a category this office had ever been designed to find. Danny did not cry. She had watched an 18-year-old die holding her hand and had not cried on the clock because the clock was for the next one, and she treated this office the same way. She got the address of the regional office. She got a name, Gulf State Family Services, the contractor the state paid to run removals in this parish. And she got a first thin thread. The children were placed. Placed. That was the word the woman used. Placed like something set down on a shelf. Emergency foster care, 41 days ago, which meant her children had been living with strangers for 5.5 weeks, while she was changing a dressing on a burned Marine outside Kuwait City and telling him he was going to be fine. Someone at St. David's later that week tried to give her a bed and a fund. The parish ran a food pantry out of the church hall, and a kind woman there heard a piece of Danny's story and started saying words like emergency assistance and we can set up a page for you. People give to a veteran. People love a veteran with kids. Danny thanked her. Danny did not take it. She was not looking for people to love her story. She was looking for her children and the law that said they were hers. There is a difference between being helped and being turned into a collection plate, and Danny had spent her whole life on the giving side of Ruthie's kitchen and knew exactly where that line was. She would take facts. She would take a lawyer. She would not take pity, and she would not be a hardship anyone got to feel good about. Malik had been drawing since he could hold a crayon, and what he drew always without variation was the porch. The house at 4417, the yellow sun over it, and 3 stick figures standing on the steps, himself, his sister, and his mother, whom he always drew in boots because his mother wore boots, tan ones, even when the army wasn't making her. He had drawn it on the backs of church programs and on the inside covers of library books, and once in permanent marker, on the wall of the front room, and Danny had not painted over it. In the placement across town, in a house on the far side of Claiborne, with a family whose name he was not told to call anything, but Miss and Mr. Malik had stopped drawing the 3 figures. The foster mother, who was not cruel, who was in fact worried about him, noticed that he had started drawing only the house. Just the house. The sun still up there, yellow faithful. But the steps empty. The foster mother's name was Miss Carroll, and Miss Carroll had raised 4 children of her own and fostered 11 more, and she knew the difference between a child who was acting out and a child who was disappearing. Malik was disappearing. He ate what she put in front of him and said thank you and did his homework and folded his own laundry, and it frightened her more than tantrums would have, because tantrums are a child still bargaining with the world. Malik had stopped bargaining. She kept the house drawings. She did not know why. She taped them to her own refrigerator, next to her grandchildren's, the way you keep something you suspect someone is going to come looking for. A house. A yellow sun. No steps. No people. Nia, who was 6, had simply stopped talking. Not to punish anyone. She had run out of the particular kind of trust that talking requires. Miss Carroll would set out cereal and Nia would eat it. Miss Carroll would ask a question and Nia would look at her. That was all. A look and then away. 6 years old and already rationing her own words like a woman rationing water. Now widen the frame, because there is a second person in this story, and the story does not work if you meet him only as a rich man in a car. On the 31st floor of a glass tower in the central business district, in a corner office he had bought the whole building to have, Curtis Boyd kept a locked drawer in a desk that had cost more than the house on Delary. Inside the drawer was a manila folder, soft at the corners from being opened, and inside the folder was a photocopy of a document 49 years old. It was a case file. His case file. The name at the top was his own, misspelled the way it had been misspelled for a decade before anyone fixed it, and under reason for removal a caseworker in 1976 had typed 6 words that Curtis Boyd had read so many times they had worn a groove in him. Father deployed. No plan of care. His father had been a soldier too. His father had gone where they sent him, and the machinery that was supposed to hold an 8-year-old boy in place until his father came back had instead set the boy down on a shelf, placed him, moved him. 4 homes in 2 years, a duffel bag that went with him each time, packed and repacked, until he aged out at 18 with that same bag and $212, and no one on any curb waiting. His father did come back. That was the part almost no one knew. His father came back, discharged and looking, and could not find him, because the system that had placed the boy had not built the thread that would lead a returning father to his own son. By the time the 2 of them were in the same city again, the boy was a grown man who had learned, all the way down in the meat of himself, one lesson and only one: nobody comes back. You do not wait on the curb. You build something so large that no one can ever place you on a shelf again. He had built it. $4.2 billion of it, in trucks, in warehouses, in the specific business of moving other people's belongings and keeping them accounted for, never lost, always found, a manifest for every box. He funded a foundation for veterans' families that he had never once visited, a board seat he never sat in, a check he signed the way you press on a wound you cannot look at. And then, on a Tuesday, driving past a poured foundation on Claiborne, he had seen a woman in tan boots sit down on a curb with a folded flag against her chest, and the groove in him had opened, and for the first time in 49 years Curtis Boyd had told a driver to stop for a reason he could not yet say. She came back, he thought, watching her. She came back for them. Nobody, said the older thought underneath it, ever came back for you. The regional office of Gulf State Family Services was on the second floor of a building on Claiborne that had once been a bank, and you could still see where the vault had been. A dark rectangle in the carpet where nothing was allowed to sit. Danny came back the next morning at 8 with a folder of her own. Deployment orders. The family care plan. Her DD 214 predecessor paperwork, her leave and earnings statements showing the allotment, the lease with 58 months of on-time stamps behind it. She had built a case the way she built a trauma bay, everything in reach, labeled, ready to hand to whoever finally showed up to help. No one showed up to help. A file showed up instead. It took her 4 visits and a records request to reconstruct what had happened, and when she finally had it laid out in front of her, it was almost unbearably ordinary. There was no villain in it, not at first. There was a sequence. In the 4th month of her deployment, her cousin Renice, the named caretaker, the person the entire plan rested on, had stopped answering the school's calls. By the 5th month, she had left the children with a neighbor and moved 3 parishes over. The neighbor kept them as long as she could. Then the neighbor, frightened, made a call to a hotline, the kind of call the system is built to receive. A child without a stable adult. That was the report. Vague, second-hand, honest in its worry and catastrophic in its consequence. The report went to an intake worker who logged it and sent it up. It landed on the desk of a regional supervisor named Renata Coyle. Renata Coyle was 46 years old and had worked in child welfare for 22 years, and she was not a cruel woman. This has to be said plainly. The story does not work if you turn her into a monster, and she was not one. She was tired. She carried a caseload the state's own guidelines said should be capped at 15, and was in practice closer to 40. 40. Each one a child. She had a screen with a queue on it, and the queue never emptied, and every name in the queue was a child who might be in danger while she read the name above it, so that the act of helping one was, always, the act of not yet helping another. And she had learned to live inside that arithmetic the way you learn to live near a highway, by ceasing to hear it, which is its own kind of injury that no one has a form for. She made decisions the way you make decisions when there are too many of them and not enough of you. Fast. By category. By the box that was easiest to check. The morning Danny's children came up the queue, Renata had already signed 11 other things. It was 10:40. She had not eaten. Her own phone had a text on it from her son's school that she had not answered. She opened the file. She read the intake note, cousin gone, neighbor can't keep them, mother unreachable. She gave it 90 seconds. That is not an exaggeration, and it is not cruelty. It is the number the queue permits, and everyone in that building knew the number and no one said it out loud. The box she checked said emergency removal, no capable caregiver identified. She signed it in the child's interest. That phrase was real. It was printed on the form, and she believed it when she wrote it, because in the 90 seconds she gave the file, what she saw was 2 children, a cousin gone, a neighbor who couldn't keep them, and a mother whose name came with an address, but no person attached to it. The mother was overseas. The mother was on the screen a blank. And a blank in a queue of 40 is not a mother. It is an empty field. She did not look for the deployment. There was a field for it. She did not fill it. That was the whole crime, and it was not even experienced as a crime. It was experienced as a Tuesday. Somewhere in America right now, a queue like that one is scrolling on a screen, and a person who has not slept enough is deciding which name gets the 90 seconds and which name gets the box. This is not an accusation of that person. It is a description of a machine that runs on people and then blames the people when it grinds someone up. While the children were being placed, a second machine was running in parallel, and its name was Dwayne Ferris. Dwayne Ferris, 39, was the property manager for the company that had bought the note on 4417 Delary 2 years back, along with half the block, the way companies do now. Not landlords so much as spreadsheets with a mailing address. Dwayne's job was occupancy. His bonus was tied to it. when the rent on 4417 went quiet in the 5th month, because the allotment that fed it had been built around a household that no longer existed the way Danny built it. Dwayne did what the spreadsheet told him to do. He filed. He knew, the way everyone on the block knew, that Miss Ruthie's granddaughter was overseas. He knew it, and he filed anyway, because the woman was a name on a ledger, and the ledger did not have a column for "She is 9 time zones away keeping soldiers alive." The unit went vacant on paper. Then it went vacant in fact. Then, the week the eviction cleared, Dwayne re-let it to a family who needed a home and asked no questions, and taped their deposit check to the inside of a folder, and moved his occupancy number up by 1. He did not feel like a man doing harm. He felt like a man keeping his job. The day he re-let 4417, he stood in the front room where Malik's house, with a son, was still on the wall in permanent marker, and the new tenant's wife asked him what that was, and Dwayne said he'd have it painted over before move-in. And he wrote, "Paint front room" on a sticky note and stuck it to the folder and never did it. Because occupancy was the number that mattered and paint was not. He looked at the drawing for a second longer than he needed to. 3 figures on a porch. 1 in boots. Then he closed the folder. Whether keeping his job and doing harm were the same thing that month was a question. Dwayne did not let himself hold for very long, because he had a daughter in braces, $1,800, paid in installments he could not miss, and a lease of his own, and the math he did was the math the rest of us do. This story is not going to pretend he was a special kind of coward. He was the ordinary kind. The kind with a reason. 2 machines. A removal machine and an occupancy machine. Neither one of them contained a single person who woke up that month intending to take a soldier's children and seal her door with a new lock. And yet between the 2 of them, that is exactly what got done. Here is where the numbers stop being background and start being the story. The Service Members Civil Relief Act is a federal law. It has been on the books in one form or another since 1940. It exists precisely so that what happened to Danny cannot happen. It protects deployed service members from default judgments, from evictions below a certain rent threshold without a court's specific attention, from being processed as a blank field while they are downrange. A landlord cannot simply evict the family of a deployed soldier the way you evict anyone else. A court is supposed to pause. A judge is supposed to look. The law assumes someone will check the box that says, "Is this person in the military, and are they deployed right now?" Because the entire point of the law is that a soldier's home should still be there when the soldier comes home. The box exists. On Dwayne's filing and on Renata's removal, the box existed. Neither of them checked it. 1 box. 2 signatures. 41 days. That is the arithmetic of how a decorated combat medic came home to plywood shoes in her doorway and a stranger's drawing on her fridge. Not a conspiracy. Not malice. 1 unchecked box copied forward through a filing and a removal 41 days wide by the time she landed. Studies of veterans and returning service members have found that housing instability follows them at rates far above the civilian population, and that the transition home, the reintegration, the paperwork, the reassembly of a life that kept moving while you were gone, is where a huge share of that instability lives. The country is very good at sending people. It is much worse at receiving them back. That gap has a body count that does not show up in any war's casualty list, and Danny had just walked into the middle of it, in tan boots, holding a flag she was carrying for someone else. That is the thing about the drumbeat she kept hearing on her own street. Everyone on Delary said it like praise. Miss Odette on the corner said it. The men outside the Sanchez Center said it. Ruthie's old church friends said it, pressing her hands. She came back. Girl went to a war and came back. They meant it as the highest thing they could say about a person, because on that block, coming back was the whole promise, the way Ruthie had taught it. But the offices on Claiborne did not hear it as praise. The offices heard her return as a problem to be processed. A mother reappearing to claim children the system had already placed is, in the language of the queue, a complication. She had done the one thing her grandmother swore was the whole point of loving anyone. And she was going to have to prove it in a building with a vault-shaped hole in the carpet to people who had a box for danger and a box for removal and no box at all for a woman who had simply, against every force arranged against it, come back. She did not take the church's bed. She did not take the fund. The second woman from St. David's found her outside the office on a Thursday in the rain, and she was kind in the specific way that is hard to refuse. Her name was Miss Gloria, and she ran the food pantry out of the church hall on Fridays. And she had heard a piece of Danny's story from someone who heard it from someone, the way things travel on a block, and she had come with a plan already half-built in her mouth. They could set up a page. People give to a veteran. People love a veteran with kids, a mother who served. It practically writes itself. And by Sunday there'd be enough to get her into a room while she fought for the babies. Danny stood in the rain and let her finish. Then she said no. She said it in the flat voice she used for things she had already decided. The voice that had told a 19-year-old with his leg open that he was going to be fine and meant it. She was not going to be the sad story at the top of somebody's feed. She was not going to let her children become the reason strangers felt briefly, comfortably moved on a Sunday afternoon before scrolling on. She had spent her whole life on the giving side of a kitchen door. Ruthie's door, the one that never latched right. And she knew exactly how it felt to be the one ladling. And she knew that the distance between helping someone and turning them into a collection plate was the length of one decision. And she was going to stay on the right side of it even now, especially now. Miss Gloria did not argue. She had run a pantry long enough to know pride when she saw it, and to know that some people's pride is the last structural wall holding the rest of them up, and you do not knock it down to hand them a sandwich. She wrote her own number on the back of a church bulletin and pressed it into Danny's hand and said, "When you want the law, not the pity, I know a woman." Then she went back inside to her Friday boxes. Danny did not call the number that week. She would later, and it would matter more than either of them could have guessed on a rainy Thursday. But not yet. What she did instead was go back up the stairs to the office with the vault-shaped hole in the carpet, folder under her arm, and ask, for the fourth time, to see whoever had signed the paper that took her children. And for the fourth time a clerk named Terrell, who was 24, and had been on the job 5 months, and hated this part more than any other part, told her that the supervisor was not available, that everything had to go through the assigned worker, that the assigned worker was managing a high volume of cases, and that the best thing she could do was wait for the scheduled hearing. Terrell said all of it looking at his keyboard. He said it because it was true, and because it was the only thing he was allowed to say, and when Danny asked him, quietly, whether he had children, he stopped typing for a second, and did not answer, and that was its own kind of answer. There is a particular exhaustion that belongs to fighting a machine that has no face to plead with. It is different from grief. Grief at least knows what it lost. This was different. This was the exhaustion of pushing against a wall that pushes back with paperwork, of being told the thing that happened to you was procedure, was standard, was in the child's interest, as though those words were a door and not just more wall. Danny had felt something like it exactly once before, in a different country, watching a soldier she could not save slip below the line no medic can reach. But that had been physics. Blood and time. This was choice dressed up as physics. And that was worse, because physics cannot check a box and a person can. She came home to an empty house every night that week. Not her house, a cot at a veteran's transitional bed she finally accepted, which was not charity, she told herself, because she had earned it in a desert, and the telling herself was almost true. She lay in the dark and did the thing she did. She inventoried. What she had orders. A lease history. A law with her situation written into its very reason for existing. What she was missing. One human being inside the machine willing to check the box everyone before them had left blank. She did not know it, but 2 blocks away, that human being had just decided to become one. For 49 years, Curtis Boyd had solved every problem the same way. He had written a check. It was not a cynical habit. It was a survival mechanism that had calcified into a philosophy. A check kept the problem at a distance. It let you help without having to stand in the room where the help was needed. And standing in that room was the one thing Curtis could not do. Because the last time he had stood in a room like that he was 8 years old, and the adults in it were deciding where to put him. So he moved money the way his trucks moved freight, efficiently at scale and without ever having to open the box. He had funded a Veterans Family Foundation for 11 years. He had a seat on its board. He had never once attended a meeting. He gave and he did not look, and the not looking was the whole point. Looking was where the 8-year-old lived. The morning after he saw the woman on the curb, he did something he had never done. He drove himself. He told his assistant to clear the day, and he did not tell her why, and he drove a car with no driver in it down to the lower 9th Ward, to a squat community building on Delary called the Sanchez Center, where the block's business got done. The food distributions, the after-school program, the folding tables where people who knew things sat across from people who needed to know them. He parked a car worth more than the building. He went in, and a man worth $3 billion stood in a doorway smelling of red beans and floor wax and did not know what to do with his hands. He had not come to give. That was the thing that frightened him. He had come to ask. A woman at a folding table asked if he was lost. It was a fair question. Everything about him said lost. The shoes that had never touched a bus floor, the watch, the stillness of a man who did not know that in a place like this you keep your hands busy or people wonder about you. Curtis said he was looking for someone who understood how children got taken from families in this parish, and how they got given back. The woman looked at him for a while, the shoes, the watch, the way trouble was clearly not usually his. A little girl ran past him carrying a juice box, and he flinched, and the woman saw the flinch, and something in her softened a degree. Then she said the name of the person everyone on that block said when that question got asked. Adiez. Miss Okafor. She's the one who reads the whole file when everybody else reads the top of it. Adiezi Okafor was 51, Nigerian-born, a kinship navigator who had spent 19 years learning the machine from the inside precisely so she could jam her body into its gears when it came for the wrong child. She had left the state agency years ago because she could not check the boxes it asked her to check. Now she worked half out of the Sanchez Center and half out of St. David's, and she took the cases nobody's budget covered, and she was, as it happened, the woman Miss Gloria had meant when she wrote a number on the back of a church bulletin and pressed it into Danny's hand in the rain. 2 threads reaching for the same knot from opposite ends. Neither knowing the other was pulling. Curtis did not give Okafor money. He tried to. It was reflex. His hand actually moved toward his jacket, and she stopped him with a look that had stopped better-dressed men than him. She did not want a donor. She wanted to know why a man like him was standing in her doorway asking about a case he would not name. So he told her about the boots. He told her he had seen a woman on a curb in desert tan boots holding a folded flag, and that he had not been able to sleep since, and that he needed to know she was all right, and Okafor, who had spent 19 years reading what people said around the edges of what they said, heard the thing under it. She asked him how old he had been. Curtis Boyd, worth $3 billion, standing in a room that smelled of red beans, said 8. And then he said the rest, the part that lived in the locked drawer, the 6 typed words. Father deployed, no plan of care. T, the 4 homes, the duffel bag, the $212. The father who came back and could not find him because no one had built the thread that leads a returning father home. That was why he froze. Not pity. Recognition. He had seen a mother come back for her children, and he had known, in his body before he knew anything else, that the machine was about to do to those children exactly what it had done to him. And that this time, impossibly, there was a version of the story where somebody stopped it. Where somebody came back, and the coming back was allowed to be enough. He was not going to write a check. He was going to open the box. Okafor made 2 calls. The first was to a legal aid attorney she trusted, and she arranged for Danny's representation to be paid quietly, through a channel that would never carry Curtis's name into a courtroom, because Okafor understood something Curtis was still learning, that a mother like Danny would rather lose with her own dignity than win as a rich man's project, and that if Danny ever felt she was being rescued, she would refuse the rescue on principle, and be right to. The help had to look like the law working, not like a billionaire's mercy. So Curtis paid for the door, and Okafor made sure Danny only ever saw the door. Danny found the door on a Wednesday, when she finally turned over the church bulletin in her jacket pocket, and dialed the number Miss Gloria had pressed into her hand in the rain. She had not called it for 6 days. She had wanted to do this alone. She had done everything alone: the plan, the folder, the 4 trips up the stairs to the vault-shaped hole in the carpet, and calling the number felt, at first, like the thing she had refused at St. David's. Like being helped. Like being a story. Okafor met her at the Sanchez Center at the same folding table and did the one thing that made Danny stay. She did not offer sympathy. She asked for the paperwork. She held out her hand for the folder the way a mechanic holds out a hand for a part, all business. And when Danny gave it to her, Okafor read it. All of it, all the way down, the way she read everything. And then she looked up and said, "You did this right. Every page. You did your part and they didn't do theirs, and I can prove it. That was all. No, you poor thing, to no page to set up, just, you did this right and I can prove it." And Danny, who had not let herself cry in front of a single person since the transport, had to look at the ceiling for a moment, because being told, "You did it right" by someone who had actually read the file, was a thing she had stopped believing she would hear. She never asked who paid for the lawyer. It looked like the law working. That was the point. The second call, the one that broke the case, had already gone out to the reserve. Because there was a whole side of this the CPS file did not contain, and it was the side that cracked the whole thing open. It took 3 transfers and a day and a half to reach the right desk, because the military is also a machine, and machines do not answer on the first ring. But the difference between the 2 machines turned out to be everything. When Sergeant Tomas Reyes, Danny's unit's readiness NCO, finally heard from the legal aid attorney that Sergeant Whitfield's children had been removed while she was deployed, he did not say, "That's terrible." He went quiet for a second. Then he said a sentence that changed everything. "She had a family care plan on file. We have it. It's federal." And then lower, in a voice the attorney would remember, "Nobody called us. We would have come." Reyes drove down himself 2 days later in uniform, and sat at the folding table across from Okafor with a folder the CPS office had never once requested. Orders. The stamped family care plan. The chain of command contact roster. The Red Cross emergency notification pathway that exists for exactly this, that can reach a deployed soldier in a matter of hours, that had never been triggered because no one at Gulf State had known, or asked, that there was a soldier to reach. He put his hand flat on the folder when he slid it over. He said Danny was the best medic in the company. He said she'd earned a Bronze Star she'd never once mentioned to any of them, that they'd found out from the citation, not from her. He said it the way soldiers say things about each other that they cannot say to each other's faces. Then he stopped talking, because his own voice had stopped being reliable, and Okafor let the silence sit, because she knew that some paperwork is grief in a folder. Here's what the allotment trail showed, once Reyes pulled it and Okafor laid it beside the CPS record. Danny had done everything. She had named a caretaker, filed the plan, set up the $780 a month, documented all of it, and the Army had a copy of every page. When Renice abandoned the role in the 4th month, the failure was Renice's, and it was real, and it hurt 2 children, and this story does not excuse it. But here was the thing the machine never checked. The moment a family care plan fails, there is a chain of people who are supposed to be notified, and the deployed soldier is supposed to be reachable through her chain of command, and none of that happened, because no one at Gulf State Family Services ever asked the one question that would have started it. Is the mother in the military? Is she deployed right now? The field was on the form. The answer was a phone call away. Reyes could have been reached in an afternoon. The whole apparatus of the United States military was standing by to help locate and reunite this exact family, and it was never called because a box went unchecked at 10:40 on a Tuesday by a woman with 11 other files. The allotment itself told the story in numbers. $780 a month, every month, on time, straight through the deployment, including the months after Renice vanished. Month 1, $780. Month 780. Month 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, $780. 780, 780, 780, 780. Not one missed. Not one late. $7,020, sent from a woman in a desert to a household that had already scattered, for the care of 2 children who were by then sleeping in a stranger's house across Claiborne. Danny had kept paying for care that was no longer being given, because she was 9 time zones away and had no way to know the care had stopped. The money never faltered. Only the person receiving it did. And nobody followed the money, because following the money would have led straight to a soldier, and a soldier is exactly the person the law says you cannot process as a blank. Okafor put the 2 records side by side on a folding table and read them the way she read everything, all the way down, and near the bottom she found it. The crack. The place where the whole removal came apart. The removal had never verified deployment status. It was required to. Under the Service Members Civil Relief Act and under the state's own contract with Gulf State Family Services, any action affecting the dependents of a service member triggers a mandatory check, a specific documented verification that runs the parent's name against the Defense Manpower Data Center, the federal database that will tell you, in seconds, whether a person is on active orders. Renata Coyle's file had a field for that verification. The field was blank. Not failed. Not negative. Blank. The check had not been run at all. One unrun check and a soldier's children became on a screen a blank field with no capable caregiver. One unrun check, standing between a mother and the law that had been written in 1940 specifically to protect her. Okafor sat back from the table. On the block, they were still saying it about Danny, still pressing her hands outside the Sanchez Center. She came back. Girl went to a war and came back. And for the first time since Danny had landed, the phrase was about to stop being a wound the system pressed on and start being the exact fact that won the case. She came back. It was on the record now in orders, in an allotment trail, in a family care plan stamped and federal. She had never left in the way the machine assumed. She had gone where she was sent, and she had come back. And now there was a woman with 19 years of scar tissue, and a returning soldier's lawyer, and a sergeant with the paperwork, all of them pulling on the same knot. And behind all of it, invisible, having paid for the door and stepped back from it, a man who had spent 49 years learning not to look, was, for the first time in his life, unable to look away. A machine that took 41 days to lose 2 children took 11 days to start giving them back once someone finally checked the box. The legal aid attorney filed on a Monday. The filing was not a plea. It was not a letter asking anyone to have mercy. It was a motion. It cited a federal statute by number, attached a deployment order, a stamped family care plan, and a 9-month allotment record, and requested an emergency hearing on one ground, that the removal had been executed without the deployment status verification that both federal law and the state's own contract made mandatory. Okafor had taught Danny the difference between the 2 kinds of document in the space of one afternoon at a folding table. One asks the machine to feel something. The other tells the machine it broke its own rule. The machine cannot feel. It can only be shown its own rule. The emergency hearing was set for the following Thursday in a family courtroom with fluorescent light and a state seal and a bench that sat a little too high. It is worth stopping here to say what these hearings usually are, because the reference to a system only matters if you know how the system actually runs. Most children who enter foster care in this country do not enter it because someone beat them. The single largest category by a wide margin is neglect. And neglect is a word that does an enormous amount of quiet work. It stretches from genuine, dangerous abandonment all the way to a mother who could not find childcare for a double shift, a father behind on the light bill, a family whose only real problem was that they were poor and alone at the wrong moment. A large share of removals are not rescues from cruelty. They are responses to poverty, to absence, to a caretaker plan that failed while the parent was somewhere they could not leave. And kinship care, placing a child with family instead of strangers, which nearly every study says is better for the child, is chronically underused and underfunded. So a cousin who might have kept 2 children for 9 months becomes instead a name in a file, unpursued. While the children go to a stranger's house, and a mother comes home to a stranger's shoes. Danny's case was a textbook instance of the thing the numbers describe. Not abuse. Absence weaponized by procedure. A removal one phone call would have prevented. The hearing lasted 90 minutes, and it moved the way an avalanche moves, slowly at the top and then all at once. Reyes testified first. He was in uniform. He put the family care plan into the record, and the orders, and the Red Cross notification pathway, and he said, under oath, in the flat institutional cadence of a man reading a readiness report, that the United States military had a system in place to reach Sergeant Whitfield within hours, that it had been available the entire time, and that no one had ever activated it because no one had ever asked whether she was a soldier. The judge, who had signed a great many removal orders in her time, asked Reyes to repeat the part about the hours. He repeated it. Within hours, ma'am. The whole time. Then the eviction file came in, and that is where Dwayne Ferris changed. Dwayne had been subpoenaed, and Dwayne had spent the week before the hearing not sleeping. He had a folder at home. The folder. The one with the sticky note that said, paint front room stuck to the front of it. The note he had written the day he relet 4417 and never acted on. Inside that folder was the eviction filing. And stapled to the eviction filing, because Dwayne was a careful man about the wrong things, was a copy of a note in his own handwriting from 5 months earlier. Tenant deployed overseas. Proceed, he had written it to himself. He had asked himself the question. And then he had answered it by filing anyway, because occupancy was the number that mattered. He could have lost that note. No one would ever have known it existed. A less careful man, or a more calculating one, would have made it disappear on the drive to the courthouse. Dwayne brought it. He put it on the table with his own hand, the handwriting facing up. He did not look at Danny when he did it. And when the attorney asked him to read it aloud, he read it in a voice that had gone to gravel. Tenant deployed overseas, proceed, then he said the only thing he said all day that was not an answer to a question. He said, I knew. I want it in the record that I knew. Whether that made him brave or only late is a question the story will leave, where Dwayne left it, on the table, facing up. He kept his job that month by filing. He lost something else by it, and he had decided, 5 months too late, that he would rather have the something else. That was the math he finally did. Whether it was the right math, and whether it came in time to matter to 2 children who had already spent 41 nights in a stranger's house, is not a question a courtroom can answer. It is only a question Dwayne could, and he answered it the only way that was still open to him. And then it was Renata Coyle's turn. Renata sat on the other side of the table with a manila folder of her own and 22 years of procedure behind her. When the attorney asked whether the deployment status verification had been completed before the removal, she said what she had come to say. She said the office followed standard protocol. She said the caseload was high. She said the intake was urgent, and a child without a stable adult is an emergency by definition. She said the removal was made in the child's interest. She said procedure, she said standard, she said protocol, and each word was a wall, and she stood behind the walls the way she had stood behind them her whole career, because the walls were real. The caseload was real. The queue was real. None of it was a lie. The attorney let her finish. Then she asked one question. Was the verification box on this specific form in this specific case checked? Yes or no? There is a kind of silence that only happens in rooms with a state seal on the wall. The box was blank. Blank on the screen. Blank on the printout. And there was no protocol in the world that could fill it in retroactively. Renata Coyle had spent 22 years being protected by procedure, and in the end it was procedure that convicted her, because procedure had required a check she had not run, and the not running was right there. A blank field in her own file under her own login. The wall she had stood behind her whole career turned around and stood in front of her instead. She had removed 2 children by pointing at a rule. She was undone by the same rule pointed the other way. She did not cry and she did not apologize. She gathered her folder. Whatever she felt, she took it out of the room with her, the way she had taken so many files out of so many rooms, and this story does not follow her out, because the story was never really about her. She was the face the machine wore that Tuesday. There would be another face on Wednesday. That is the whole problem, and it does not fit in a courtroom. While the adults argued about a box, a drawing was doing its own quiet work across town. Miss Carroll, the foster mother, had kept every one of Malik's house drawings on her own refrigerator, and in the days before the hearing she had noticed the boy start to change. He had begun again to draw the porch. Not just the house, the porch and the steps and figures on the steps. One of the figures wore boots. He drew it small and pressed hard, the way children draw the things they are afraid to hope for. And Miss Carroll, who had raised 15 children not her own and knew exactly what she was looking at, took the drawing and put it in an envelope and gave it to the attorney and said, "They'll want this. It says everything I'd say if they let me talk." And here the last loop closed, the one that had been open since the very first minute on the porch. Because the drawing on Danny's own refrigerator, the house with the yellow sun that had stopped her cold in the doorway, the one she had not drawn and her children had not drawn, had belonged to the new tenant's child. It had been taped up over the exact spot where Malik's marker drawing still lived on the wall behind it, the mural Dwayne had meant to paint over and never had. A stranger's child had drawn a house with a sun and taped it over another child's house with a sun, neither of them knowing, both of them drawing the one thing every child draws when they want to believe a home is a fixed and permanent thing. And when the reunification order came and Danny was finally let back into 4417 to prepare it for her children, she found Malik's original, the real one, the 3 figures on the porch, one in boots, folded into a drawer in the kitchen, where someone, maybe the tenant, maybe a mover, had tucked it out of the way instead of throwing it out. 3 stick figures. A yellow sun. A mother in boots. Folded in quarters and kept by a stranger in a drawer for no reason anyone could name, except that some things you do not throw away, even when they are not yours. The house had to be made a home again, and Danny did it the way she did everything. Room by room. Inventory by inventory. The new tenants had left it clean. They were not villains either. They were a family who had needed a place and asked no questions, and they had gone when the court said go. And they had left the walls bare and the floors swept and a child's height marks penciled up the kitchen doorframe that were not Malik's and not Nia's. Danny stood and looked at those pencil marks for a while. Another mother's children had grown a few inches against her doorframe, while her own children grew a few inches in a stranger's house across town. Nobody in this had wanted to hurt anybody. That was almost the worst of it. She peeled the tenant's yellow sun drawing off the fridge gently, and underneath it, on the wall behind, Malik's marker mural was still there, faded, permanent, the porch and the sun and the 3 of them. The thing Dwayne had meant to paint over and never had. She had not painted over it before she left because it was her son's. Dwayne had not painted over it because occupancy was a number and paint was a chore. 2 different reasons, one result, the drawing survived. She put Malik's folded original in her breast pocket, over the flag-shaped ache that had not left since the transport, and she went to buy groceries, because her children were coming home tomorrow, and there would need to be food in the house. What she bought and what she did not told the whole 9 months in a single receipt. A box of the cereal Malik liked, the one with the parrot. Strawberry milk for Nia, who would not drink it plain. Crayons, a big box, 64, the kind with the sharpener in the back, because a boy who had started drawing porches again was going to need more than the 8 count. Construction paper, a pack of white undershirts, size 7. Bananas. Bread. A rotisserie chicken, because there would be no time to cook the first night. She went up and down the aisles filling a cart for a household that was about to exist again, and there was nothing in the cart for herself. No coffee. No small thing she might have wanted. She had not bought herself a single thing in 9 months that was not boots or a bandage, and she did not start now. She was not being noble. She simply did not think of herself as one of the mouths that needed feeding. She was the one who fed them. She always had been. The judge ordered reunification from the bench. She used the words, unlawful removal. She used the words, the protections that exist for exactly this circumstance. She ordered the children returned to their mother's custody, and she ordered the record corrected, and then she said one more thing that was not required by any statute. She set down her pen. She looked at Danny. And she said, "Sergeant Whitfield, thank you for your service, and I am sorry for how this country repaid it." It was not a legal finding. It was just a person on a bench saying the true thing. The block would say it too when the news traveled the way news travels on Delary. Miss Odette would say it on the corner. The men outside the Sanchez Center would say it. She came back. Girl went to a war and came back, And this time, for the first time, the sentence had a second half the machine could not take away. She came back, and they gave her children back, because she had done it right and someone had finally read the file. At the back of the courtroom, in the last row, a man in an ordinary jacket had watched the entire 90 minutes without saying a word. No one knew who he was. He had worn nothing that morning that would draw an eye. No watch. No car out front with a driver. He had paid for the door, and then he had come to stand in the room, which was the harder thing. The thing he had not been able to do for 49 years. Danny did not know his name. She would not for a while yet. She only knew, when it was over and she turned around, that a gray-haired man in the back row was looking at her the way no stranger had ever looked at her. Not with pity, which she would have refused. With something that looked almost like recognition, as though he were seeing something in her that had happened a long time ago to him. He caught up with her on the courthouse steps. Danny had come out into the afternoon, with Malik's folded drawing in her breast pocket, and no idea what to do with the hour between winning and holding her children, which was scheduled for the following morning, an eternity away. She was standing at the top of the steps, not going anywhere. And the gray-haired man from the back row came out behind her, slower the way a man moves when he has spent the whole walk deciding whether to speak, and he stopped a few feet from her, and he said her name. Not Sergeant Whitfield. Not ma'am. Just Danielle. She turned. She had refused a church bed, a fund, and a page with her face on it. She was ready to refuse whatever this was too. But he did not offer her anything. That was the thing that stopped her. He did not have a card in his hand or a check or a look of practiced sympathy. He had his hands in his pockets like a man at a bus stop, and he looked at her boots, the tan ones, the ones she had worn on the steps because they were the only shoes she owned that had been where she had been. And then he looked at her face, and he said the thing he had come 49 years to be able to say to somebody. He said, I was one of them. The children. A long time ago. My father was deployed, and while he was gone, they decided there was no plan of care. And they took me, and they moved me 4 times in 2 years. And my father came back for me and could not find me, because nobody built the thread that leads a father home. He said it plainly, the way you say a thing you have carried so long it has worn smooth. He said nobody ever came back for me. And then he said, watching her, you came back for them. Danny did not say anything. She had been braced against pity for 6 weeks, and this was not pity, and she had no defense prepared for the thing it actually was. And Curtis Boyd, who had solved every problem of his life by writing a check and never standing in the room, stood in the room. He said the words with nothing attached to them, no offer, no rescue, just the words. You went where they sent you, and you came back for your children. That is not something you have to earn back. Whatever they made you feel these last weeks, that you had to prove you were their mother, that your coming home was a problem to be processed, that was theirs, not yours. It wasn't yours to carry. I know exactly how heavy it is, because I have carried the other end of it my whole life. And you're not carrying it alone anymore. He did not say it grandly. He said it like a man setting down something he had held too long. And the drumbeat that had run under this whole story, the sentence the block said like praise and the offices heard like a complaint. She came back, she came back, she came back. Finally turned all the way over and landed where it had been headed since the first minute on the porch. For 9 months coming back had been the thing Danny did and no one honored. For 49 years coming back had been the thing that never happened to a boy in 4 different houses. And now, on a set of courthouse steps in the lower 9th Ward, the two of them stood in the small overlap where those 2 facts met, and for the first time in either of their lives, coming back was enough, because someone had finally come back for her too. She did not cry exactly. She had not cried in front of anyone since the transport, and she did not break that now. But she reached up and pressed her hand flat against her breast pocket, against the folded drawing of a porch with 3 figures on it, one in boots, and she held it there, and she let a stranger see her do it, which for Danny was the same as weeping. He did not say anything else. He did not need to. The children came home the next morning. Naya came first, carried out to the car by Miss Carroll, who had packed the little girl's things in a real bag and not a garbage bag, and who had cried the whole night before and would not let anyone see it. Nia had not spoken in 6 weeks. Not to the placement, not to the caseworkers, not to the well-meaning strangers who had knelt to her level and asked her questions in the soft voice people use on children they have already filed. She had rationed her words down to nothing. And when Miss Carroll set her down on the sidewalk on Delary and Danny knelt, not saying anything either, because Danny understood better than anyone that some silences are not empty, they are full and waiting. Nia looked at her mother for a long moment, and then she said one word. She said, "Mama." Just that. The first word in 6 weeks, spent on the one person it had been saved for. Malik did not run. He was 9, and he had learned in 6 weeks not to trust a good thing until it held still long enough to be sure of. He walked. He walked up to his mother, and he looked at her boots, and then he looked up, and he took a folded piece of paper out of his own pocket. The drawing Miss Carroll had sent to the attorney, or its twin, the porch and the sun and 3 figures, one in boots, and he held it up so his mother could see he had started drawing it again. He had put the 3rd figure back. That was how he said everything he could not say. He had spent 6 weeks drawing a house with an empty porch, and now the porch had all 3 of them on it again. And the mother wore boots, because his mother wore boots, even when the army wasn't making her. Danny took her son's drawing in one hand and her daughter in the other arm, and she carried both of them up the steps of Forvor 17, past the new deadbolt that was hers now, into the house that was full again, and this time every person inside it was hers. The rest of it, the part the machine would call the resolution, happened afterward, quietly, the way real things do. Curtis Boyd's name never appeared in Danny's case. It never would. But in the months that followed, the Veterans Foundation he had funded for 11 years, and never once visited, acquired, for the first time, a chairman who came to the meetings. He walked into the first one and sat down, and the board did not know what to do, because the man whose money had built the room had never been in the room. He restored 4417, quietly through the foundation, framed as a veterans' housing grant so that Danny could accept it as a program and not a gift, because he had learned from Okafor that the shape of help matters as much as the help. And he stood up something new. A legal fund staffed with attorneys who did nothing but one thing: monitor removals and evictions involving deployed Guard and Reserve parents, and check every single time the one box that a tired woman with 40 files had left blank. He named it after nobody. He did not put his name on it. A man who had spent his life making sure nothing he was responsible for could ever be lost had finally found the one shipment worth tracking, the children the country sent people away from and then failed to send home to. And the machine that had taken Danny's children lost something too, and it lost it the same way it had taken them. By a file. By procedure. With no one hearing its side. Because Reyes had put the Red Cross pathway in the record, and Okafor had put the blank verification field in the record. And once a thing is in the record, it does not stay in one courtroom. A state audit opened. It was not dramatic. There was no perp walk, no press conference, no moment of villainy exposed. There was an auditor and a sample of files, and a finding that Gulf State Family Services had, in a measurable percentage of cases involving service member parents, skipped the mandatory deployment status verification that its own contract required. The contract had a clause for that. Contracts always do. The state pulled it. And Renata Coyle, who had removed 2 children by pointing out a rule, was removed from her position the same way, by a file, by a finding, by a procedure that moved without ever once asking her to explain the caseload of 40 or the queue that never emptied or the 11 other files she had signed before Danny's at 10:40 on a Tuesday. No one heard her side. That was the machine's single consistent feature, the one it applied to everyone equally, in the end including the people who ran it. She had built her career on a wall that did not distinguish between the guilty and the merely overwhelmed. And the wall, when it turned, did not distinguish either. It was not justice exactly. Justice would have been a system that did not need a billionaire's guilt and a sergeant's paperwork and a 19-year veteran of nobody's budget to make it check one box. It was closer to arithmetic. A thing that had been taken returned. A rule that had been ignored enforced. A boy who was never come back for, standing at last in the room, watching a mother come back and making sure this time that it counted. This story is fictional. Danny, Curtis, Renata, the folded drawing in a kitchen drawer, none of them are real people, and no part of this is a real case. But the systems it describes are real, and they do not need a script to keep running. The Service Members Civil Relief Act is a real federal law. It exists so that a deployed service member cannot lose their home, their children's stability, or a default judgment simply because they are somewhere they cannot leave. The protection is only as good as the check behind it. The moment someone in an office fails to ask whether a parent is on active orders, the law becomes a box that no one ticked. Look up the current escrow housing and civil protections before you trust any single detail here. The principle is solid, and the exact thresholds are worth reading in full. Housing instability follows returning service members at rates well above the civilian population, and the transition home, the paperwork, the reassembly of a life that kept moving while you were gone, is where a great deal of that instability lives. The country is very good at sending people. It is worse at receiving them back. And most children who enter foster care in this country do not enter it because someone hurt them. The largest category by far is neglect, a word that stretches from real danger to a family whose only failure was being poor and alone at the wrong moment. Kinship care, placing a child with family instead of strangers, is better for the child by nearly every measure, and it is chronically underused. A cousin who could have kept 2 children becomes a name in a file that no one calls. If you or someone you love is living any piece of this, there are real doors, and they are not charity. Dial 211 for local housing, legal, and family resources anywhere in the United States. Military OneSource connects Guard, Reserve, and active duty families to legal help and emergency support. Your installations or unit's legal assistance office handles SCRAR questions directly. Legal aid organizations enforce these protections every day, and there are attorneys whose entire job is exactly the box that got left blank in this story. If a child you know is caught in a removal, ask about kinship placement by name and ask early. The system rarely offers it first. Here is the thing to carry out of this. The country asks some people to leave everything to serve it, and then treats their coming back as the thing they have to explain. It shouldn't. Coming back should be the easy part. It should be the part the whole apparatus is arranged to make simple, and instead it is too often the part where a life quietly comes apart, one unchecked box at a time. You don't need $3 billion to be the person who checks it. You don't need a foundation or a courtroom or a folded drawing in your pocket. Sometimes you just need to be the neighbor who asks the returning soldier on your block whether she's okay, and to mean it, and to still be there the second time you ask. The whole failure in this story was that no one for 41 days was that person. The whole repair was that eventually someone was. If this one stayed with you, don't share it for the algorithm. Share it because somewhere near you, right now, a parent is coming home to a life that moved on without them, and the difference between a story that ends the way this one did and one that doesn't is often just one person deciding not to look away. She came back. Make sure the ones near you have somewhere to come back to.